shit. I don't trust them.
I don't trust them either.
They're not to be trusted ever.
Yeah.
They should just accept. If they accepted psychoanalysis, I would trust therapists.
Well, I saw a therapist who was a psychoanalyst.
How did that work?
It was pretty weird.
Did she actually about your mother?
We did a lot of dream interpretation, which actually was pretty fun. Because whenever I have crazy dreams, I always go on dream dictionaries anyway.
Okay.
But, I had this, like, bona fide psychoanalyst there.
Yeah, yeah.
But it got pretty tiring because he would just kind of, like, turn everything into dicks. Like, no, like, it got, I was like, is this your entire repertoire? You got nothing else? Like, no, really. I'm not being hyperbolic. Like, I'd be like, so I had this dream. I was, like, sitting at a table. And, like, my dad was there and this other person was there. And then he was like, was the table long? And I was like, it was.
Oh shit.
And then he would like explain to me about how like the table was like a representation of the phallus and like something that, and yeah, it was like every dream I had was some iteration of that.
All right, so that Lacan book that I just got has like 2 chapters on the phallus, so we gotta read it.
I read that. Yeah, no. I mean that. I think I told you that Mbembe book that I got, the Post Colony.
Oh, with the fucking savage?
God, no, 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 the chapter is called God's Phallus. I sent it to you.
Is that the one where it was like daddy must consent to being daddy or something like that?
No, that was something else I
okay.
unwillingly had to read for my class.
What we should read that. Like, what is this God's Phallus thing?
Well, I wasn't reading my coursework like I should have, so I couldn't tell you. It was something about it was like colonialism and Freud, and I don't know what that chapter was about, but I remember one of the chapters was he was describing like the experience of the colonial frontiers, one of vertigo.
Okay.
And he becomes super descriptive of like the experience of the colonists and like how they're like all sweaty and like bleeding and they're in this like constant vertigo and like miasma in this like super humid environment. It was very, I think I told you about it and you said it was very Bataillean, like the very like grotesque, like animalistic kind of descriptions.
I think I remember that conversation because somehow I pivoted it into talking about Italian futurism.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, that could be something.
It's kind of nice because I literally just pivoted this into talking about Italian futurism.
Yeah. You got a thing for Italians.
They call me Othello.
Nice.
Fuck. All right, so what do we read this week?
All right. We both read, you understood, I did not, The Sacred in Everyday Life.
Yeah,
by
from Michel Leiris.
Michel Leiris.
Yeah, so Michel Leiris was he was like surrealist, and then he was also one of Bataille's boys and like doing lectures at the College of Sociology. Think he was a little bit associated with Acefal, but he may not have been. And writing about the sacred and stuff, writing about different things like anthropology. Well, not anthropology, but more ethnography. But yeah, first thoughts. What did you think about this? The sacred in everyday life. Was this like, aside from that last Bataille thing that we read, with Bataille and Yves Klein, is this like kind of like your first touch on like things speaking primarily about the sacred?
Yeah, I think these readings are really my first encounter with, I don't know how you would describe this genre. It's like post-modernism?
I think
almost?
It's before postmodernism.
It's before, okay.
Like these are the guys responsible, kind of.
Right, like they were, like the people who were putting together like psychoanalysis, post-structuralism, aesthetics, all these different things.
Yeah.
Right, like art history, like critical theory. Were they part of like those schools and shit?
Like mixing a bunch of shit together.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's these guys.
Yeah. I could tell he was part of the genre because I couldn't understand anything he was saying.
You said you got it at the beginning though. Like you were like at first like, yo, this is good. Like I understand this. He's speaking clear, and then you're like, what? So where
Tricked
in
me.
the reading did he lose you?
Um, I think it was because he was being very descriptive in the minutia of his everyday life in childhood, and
Mm-hmm.
sort of like the symbolisms around things, and just things that obviously are very apparent to him, but I feel like I would have liked it a little bit more if he kind of would have like walked through what exactly he meant when he was describing these like different kinds of meanings to things. 'Cause it's like one of those things that when you read it, it's like really cool, but I can't exactly pinpoint what
I
they're
think
saying.
that's the point of it, though. Like he's explaining
Yeah.
how it's like it's sacred in everyday life. So he's talking about how it's personal, you know.
Right.
And because it's such a personal account, like he's explained it to you, but like the like the meaning and like that the strength of the memories that he's like going in with, and then like making a myth around it, like it's all to him, you know. So
Right.
in reality, he probably doesn't care if someone understands it as much as he's trying to give an account of, hey, this is how you can look at your own life in a sacred way, you know. Like as I'm doing this, you get like use this as like a blueprint to how you can like look at your life, you know.
Yeah. It struck me as very animist
Okay, explain.
in a way, like in the sense, because correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems as if that like one of the first premises that he opens up the text with is he is pushing back against a this like strict division between the profane and the sacred. So like normally how we think of the sacred as, the site of worship, the
Mm-hmm.
site of the church or the temple, and then it's separated from everything else, everyday life, and profane is the word he uses. And it seems as if there's a sentence where he says exactly this, but he is kind of skeptical of that. And he's trying to create myth making and sites of the sacred in the sort of everyday minutia of life, not just in childhood. He's just using that as an example because I think he says it's the least adulterated, which I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah. Um, I think that makes sense, and it's also like considering this time, uh, Raja Kawa spoke of it too. Like around this time of like modernization and shit, and like the individual and everything, like the sacred does become something that's like yours to experience on your own. So it's like you said, it's not something that's just like set towards like churches and state and like those type of ordered things, like it's your personal account of things, whereas like before, a personal account of something or something that wasn't like in that exact realm of the sacred would be considered profane. It's weird. It's like in this, it's like the profane, which is like the world of not like church or state or whatever, has individual pockets of the sacred. It's like the sacred has like you can experience it in whatever, but it's not that you have to look for it, but just recovering your memories of childhood, which is interesting considering his affiliation with surrealism and how he's like looking through the memories and kind of letting um, these things come up and then creating the myth and the reality of it, like through writing, like using writing as like a tool of like alchemy and magic, but in this tool of creation where he's literally creating the myth himself, and this makes it permanent.
Right. So for people like myself
Okay.
who aren't as keen to the premises of surrealism, like what is the relationship?
Okay, so surrealism, like my understanding of it, I guess would be like a little bit different, like asshole-ish at times. Because like if you ask me,
Asshole-ish.
yeah, I'm gonna be an asshole about it because like I feel like the normal view of surrealism, like people like be like, oh, paint it, like, you know, surrealist painting, like, ooh, this looks weird, it's so surreal, like, and I'm like, no, fuck that, that's not surrealism. Like surrealism is like the actual function of thought. Like those niggas were working with shit like they were like, yo, they were like continuing the work of like Freud in their mind, you know, like really digging in to the unconscious, like to try to release this. Like they felt like the unconscious world and the conscious world, like the waking world and the dream world, were disconnected, but in reality they were continuous, and the idea was to link these two things together to make a complete life, the surreality as opposed to the reality, right? So like, and the first thing that they mentioned is you do this through tactics of writing or speaking. They didn't say anything about fucking painting and drawing and shit at first. That came later on, like with automatic processes and stuff. And really, like the reason like why I take like an asshole point, I'm always like, oh, like painting's not surrealism, is because like you have to put too much thought into it. Like I'm just being an asshole, but like you have to. There's a lot of planning with that, you know, and like me, I feel like it's a lot of thinking. But then again, you know, you're working with the different inspirations and stuff, so you can. You know, like it is, but my surrealism deals probably more with like writing, speaking, verbal, some type of odd self-discovery, like a weird like pseudoscience, you know?
Yeah. So their desire to link these two realms together, like the conscious and the unconscious, or to dig deeper into this conceptualization of the unconscious that they're drawing on from Freud, is this a response to like the emerging secularism of that time? Like what sort of like the impulse that's driving their desire to understand these things and to merge them?
Like the utilitarian world, and probably like isolation, individual good taste, you know, like considering things that are like taboo and not to be touched, but and then like, you know, certain things that are not to be touched, breaking off this other part of life is kind of making an incomplete life, you know what I mean? So it's like this desire to like be full, and like a lot of them like, you know, interested in like ethnography and like primitive shit, so like they felt that they were like in this new world, like they felt like they were missing this human connection aspect, you know, because like, it's repressed, he's put away, made taboo.
So he reminded me of something he mentioned where he says, I believe he's talking about the horse racing, in his childhood that he would observe with his brother, and he's talking about how he would keep a sense of wonder that continued and made him see all sports spectacles as a form of ritual.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which is interesting because we were just talking about hardcore dancing, and other things as a form of ritual. But what you said about them being interested in ethnography, I imagine that because I think a lot of the early ethnographers are people who were interested in ethnography in that time, like they were doing these projects where they were observing these tribes and trying to understand, like, you know, the lifeways and the systems of these people, and like the totems and the systems of ritual that they have, and how those things were lost or dissolved in sort of man's descent or ascent, depending on your perspective, into sort of secularism, into civilization, into industrialization, urbanism, all these sort of things, like rituals, rites of passage, religious meaning. All these things were sort of lost. And I mean, I'm not too sure what this guy's history is, but I imagine that was something
without a doubt.
Yeah, that was like influential, because I think that was really a central thrust for a lot of early anthropology.
It's all there, and like, I mean, my grab of it is like I learned about all that from like art history, you know, because like all those artists of that time, like from like avant-garde on, are dealing with that, you know, and like trying to make this connection. It's really, really apparent in the group Lagrange. That was the name of their paper. They originally called themselves the Simplists. So it's like Rene Demol and Roger Gilbert Leconte. So, and there's a couple other dudes in the group. But I don't look at them. Roger's my favorite. But like there's some of their writings, and like I said, we'll probably read them, go through them. Like they really, really touch on that aspect of something being lost, and like trying to make this connection back by like going through and looking at like old rituals, especially like magic and stuff like that, or like anything like rituals, trying to and trying to create new ones, you know, like for the modern world, like some really interesting like futurism type shit that they were doing. But like it was in actually pretty fucking futurist, like this idea of like breaking down, like going to the like the bare and the base of things, to the fundamentals of stuff, and then like going to the future, you know. Like one of my professors mentioned it before, and he was like, this idea like in futurism, which they're using here obviously if they're like working with like primitive stuff, or like, you know, is this idea of like regression to go forward. And it's interesting too because like Leiris is using his memories, you know, so like he's going to the past to build forward to his future, but like kind of passing the present. You know, it's like this weird like slingshot effect, you know.
Yeah, in that sense I feel like the piece is like a exercise in psychoanalysis,
Probably.
right?
Yeah,
I mean, I feel like that's sort of like the purpose, or like one of the main drives of psychoanalysis. It's like how creating a system of meaning, especially from your childhood. Right?
Because then like that system of meaning, you get to like, it gives you something to understand and kind of control and work with, and then like you get to like change things, like move things around, and like it's like reparent yourself, like rebuild yourself in a sense.
Right. And I think that drive it's much more apparent in psychoanalysis than other forms of psychotherapy.
Yeah.
Like I'm not super well versed in like the different iterations of psychology, but I know like for in certain fields there's more of a preoccupation with like emotional management, or or productivity management, or or creating systems of symbols and meaning aren't a center focus to like the practice and the relationship between the therapist and the client. In fact, many of those fields, I think they would say that that's actually that would be a distraction from like delving into one's childhood, would be a distraction from the much more worthy or important goal of, you know, being able to make you more habituated or socialized to like your current conditions and your current problems and everything. I think that's sort of a fault line between, I guess I would call them old school trained psychoanalysis and sort of more contemporary people with more like contemporary training.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So do you think it's like a good thing to be built, like to like go and build systems like that? You think it's kind of religious?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think just the institution of therapy is sort of, I mean, it's something that only emerges in a nation's a certain type of level of economic development, right? Where I think when tribal organizations, communal forms of social organizations, or village level types of organizations, when those things begin to dissolve and all you have left really, not even the nuclear family, but all you have left is the individual, I think that is when the relationship between the therapist and the client becomes that's when it becomes the most pressing.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like, where else do you go to create a system of meaning? Where else do you go to like deal with your own, it's creating a system of meaning, and also where do you go to deal like with your own demons and with and the things that haunt you? Because like at first I would say that like the confession that sort of had played that role, but as society becomes increasingly more secularized, I would say that maybe therapy in some ways, not in all, but in some ways, sort of replace the role of the institution, which is definitely
sense.
like, I'd say kind of Foucauldian. I think that's something that he says. I think in like Birth of a Clinic.
I only read the history of sexuality.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know what he's talking about half the time.
That nigga's mad horny.
Well, I know you don't like therapists.
Yeah.
So what do you think? I'm interested in your opinion on this.
I think my reason is that maybe it's like kind of selfish. I feel like I would go and I would not want to speak to them or do any work because I would be like, oh, they're just paid to listen to me. Like, they don't care.
Right.
And I would feel like, and then like it would just feel like a weird transaction thing, you know? And then in my view, I would be like, well, if they're just helping me work through my shit and create this system of meaning for myself and like, you know, like critically look at what's going on, why can't I do that myself?
Right.
Or like I feel like I would turn to like some type of like personal religious form as opposed to look to that, you know? Like I think it has something to do with that. I feel it wouldn't be genuine because of the pay.
Right. I agree. I think that's a very slippy fault line between in the relationship. It's that it's essentially a transactional one, and I think that bothers some people more than others.
Yeah.
But I do think that it changes the dynamic between you two. I mean, well, it defines the dynamic between you two, right? Because it's like their care for you ends with your ability to keep the relationship alive, like through your finances, right? I mean, not to say that like feelings don't develop. Obviously, therapists do care deeply about their clients.
Yeah.
But they have their own business, you know,
Yeah.
and I don't fault them for that.
I think it's not really like I don't have things like strong against it. It's just personally for myself too, you know, like, and it's also, I think that in a way that can be good because then like that lets you know it's like, okay, I'm going here not to bullshit. Like I'm going here to work on something. And like with the aspect of money, you're giving something. So it's like, I need to make this work. Like there's like, this has to be worth it. So in a way it's like a motivation. Like
in ideal circumstances.
Yeah.
I think most people are just fine wasting a lot of money to have someone to listen to them vent.
Yeah. I mean,
it's a rare resource these days.
Sometimes that's good because it's important to like just have somebody to listen to, you know, like to, like just to know that like you're not talking to yourself all the time. It's like, oh shit, like you think too? Fuck.
Yeah.
Like that's really helpful. And if it's like, you know, maybe it's good with like the whole pay thing because it's like you know they're not going to necessarily like the pay says like they can't judge you, like they're not like your friend that's gonna be like, oh haha blah blah blah, you know what I mean? Like there's something there that makes it like maybe in its own right a weird like sacred thing,
right?
You know?
Yeah. I think also there is a I wonder how much of a self feedback loop there is to these kinds of practices, because I feel like undergirding the practice, at least with like going back to old school psychoanalysis, is that the realm or the site where you are going to find meaning and build meaning is in childhood, right? That's always where you go back to. That it's almost like a rite of passage. It's like you can't move on into the next phase of maturity. You can't move on from like these ghosts that haunt you until you delve back into your childhood, and make meaning of that. And there's like this huge importance that is like ascribed to the experiences one has as a child. But at the same time, I also feel like there's sort of it's like a feedback loop, you know? It's like you begin I think there's almost like an obsessional element to it that can be elicited from that kind of orientation. But yeah, I don't
Maybe in
know.
the sense that it's like a feedback loop. It's almost like, like them holding up a mirror of yourself that like you kind of can't bullshit,
Right.
like, and I think that's valuable. Maybe I just
The,
have like an aesthetic interest
right.
in psychoanalysis.
The question is it valuable enough to pay $50 for an hour?
Yo, I barely even want to pay $50 for equipment or things that I like. So, yeah, I don't know, get a little cheap sometimes,
Yeah.
but that's okay.
Where did we leave off with this paper? I think we got kind
like
of
the fucking beginning of
off
it.
track. Yeah. Something I thought was something that stuck out to me while I was reading it was so this paragraph right here,
Okay.
where it starts with, like the maker of a religion, the great revolutionary or conqueror, it would seem that the champion has a destiny, and that the dizzying rise of one so often the product of the most deprived portions of the populace is a sign of unusual luck or magic force of a mana that in one leap lets him get to the top and reach a social rank that is, of course, somewhat marginal, but out of proportion to anything that common persons have any right to reasonably expect, no matter what their birth. In certain respects, he reminds me of the shaman, who originally is very often only someone who is deprived, but who takes an astonishing revenge on destiny, as a result of his being absolutely the only one who is in hand and glove with the spirits. So I want to hear what you think about that paragraph.
He's talking about after the this is about the racetrack stuff.
Yeah, I think this is
Yeah,
right
so,
after he's
yeah.
kind of exploring that.
Okay, so he's talking about like the jockeys at the racetrack and
Mhm.
like they're so what he's doing here, he's going through his past and looking at specific objects or places or events, and then he is like, because those stand out to him like strong memories and have some type of like way of like kind of, they were building blocks in his life, maybe like of who he is today, like he that's because they're so strong of a memory. Then he's going through and like doing association things and creating a myth out of them, right? So when he's talking about like the shaman and this and mana and like kind of like the hero aspect of it, he's talking about how like the race jockeys, because of their position and because everybody's there to watch them and because like they're the centerpieces of this ritual, almost like these weird like priests and stuff, it's like then they're doing this magical ritual, which is the race, and it's set up a particular way. There's steps, but like with this stuff, like you can set it up but you don't know the exact outcome, just like you don't know the exact outcome of a winner. Or like if you do a magical thing, like you're setting up to do something, but it might come out a little bit different, right? So he's building up this thing to like show, compare how the race jockeys, like how that is sacred. And then like he talks about how like him and his brother like looked towards that as something that they wanted to aspire to at points, right? Like have something that stands out, that has like this force of meaning, like something to kind of like look up to, like a weird hero in a sense. Like, he speaks of like the uniforms and everything and that being like a religious regalia and stuff, I don't think he was so much trying to like like make this big point, as opposed to he's bringing all those different terms and words together in that paragraph, like a painting. Like think of those all as different colors, and he's mixing them together to create a new color, like by combining those other colors together to create a new color. Like he's bringing things together to make meaning, different separate things that may have particles of the meaning that he's trying to get at, and he's bringing them together to make a full meaning of what the race jockey can mean to him, like why it's sacred, why it's important, why it's so strong of a memory, how that race jockey stands out different than other things in society, like how it's not ordinary. It's like a weird like gladiator, you know what I mean? It's a warrior.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense.
Okay, yeah. Like I guess like with this style of stuff, it's like I remember doing like this study on like surrealism, and I remember asking, it was more like surrealism and like everything around it at the time, and like me and my friend Lexa, like we asked professors, like I remember it was like is this shit metaphor or are they serious? He's like, it's metaphor. Like, you know, he called like a lot of avant-garde like artists lyricists because they were all writing at the time, like writing like their own like theories and manifestos and shit. But it's like it's poetic, you know, like the idea of like poetry, like bringing these things together that are like kind of opposites, but marrying them to create this like new meaning.
Yeah, I think and I think he does that really well here, like in the way that he's sort of able to weave together this academic theoretician
Mm-hmm.
sort of way of writing, but then he goes between that and a more like poetic and mythic way of writing, and then
Yeah.
also a psychoanalytic way that's like super in depth, almost Bataillean.
Mm-hmm.
That's more your territory, but it seems like he like the really detailed description. Um, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember like the where he's talking about like him and his brother in the bathroom?
Right, right. That was actually the scene that I was thinking of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's the best understanding of this and like how that's sacred and like how to do this type of thing with your own life. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
it's like he talks about like him and his brother have this bathroom that's to themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's on. He kind of says it's like the left pole of the parents like house and or the parents' bedroom, which is like the right pole, and the parents' bedroom
Mm-hmm.
holds like all like the qualities of like authority, like the father's hat or the father's gun, you know. um so the bathroom itself, it's interesting how he plays it because there's a clock in there and then there's pictures of his grandparents, right? So the clock is like the representation of time, but like they're also, when they're there, they're kind of like they stop time, you know. And then like the grandparents,
Mm-hmm.
it's like this connection with ancestry, history, everything, you know. But it's also like assuming his grandparents were passed away at the time, it's like death, but because they lived, he lives. So it's like this thing of death and life at the same time in there. So it's making that space sacred. It's strange, right? Like there's different things going on with like time and area in there, and then it's just him and his brother. So, and he spoke of his brother sitting on the toilet as, but like that toilet represents like the throne. His brother's the high
Mm-hmm.
priest, and he's the neophyte learning. And what they're doing there is telling each other these stories of like stories of animals, but the like it's like stories like that go in every aspect of life. So it could be like love and everything, but then it gets like about like war and battle and kingdoms, all this shit, right? And it's amazing because they continue these stories each night, like it never stopped. Like the surrealist aspect of like in the first surrealist manifesto, Breton mentions that like what if dreams are continuous every night?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's the same thing, and like when you wake up you're actually interrupting, but like actually dreams connect, you know. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's just this world that just keeps going.
Oh,
um
that's cool.
yeah, so like in this instance, like their stories, they're doing that each time they go into that bathroom. And another aspect that makes that bathroom so sacred is because like it's secret to them,
Mm-hmm.
because they're the only ones that know what's going on. The family knows they're going in there. They know that place is a place, a secret place, but no one knows what's going on behind closed doors aside from him and his brother, who are in there making stories about life, mythologizing life,
Mm-hmm.
asking questions about love, like what they're gonna do, thinking of what they're gonna be in life, writing things down. You know, like it's like going in there and doing the strange like rite of passage, ritual, church, confession. It's completely sacred, and this stuck out to him, and he brought it here for this writing, and probably just like let that I like. It probably came up and he just wrote it like working with like the automatism, you know, like not denying things that come up, you know, like not trying to repress memories. He wrote it and he went with it, and then went with association to see like how this like associate like with the ideas like priests and shit like that, you know, like pulling in the ideas like word association, which he talks about later with like the vocables and stuff, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I wonder the extent to which I feel like practices or theories like this. I'm interested in um, if there's a relationship, which I think there is in like the context that they emerge in, specifically like, we were talking about industrialization and secularism before. When there is a absence of sort of communal coherence,
Mm-hmm.
so that there's an absence of coherence in, I'm part of this polity, I'm part of this community, I'm part of this tribe, and these are our shared symbols and our shared myth making and our shared like stories and like stories of origin, etc. And those things are missing, and so then people have to turn to this thing called the self, which is like the most important thing in the 20th or 21st century.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And sort of and create this meaning making from these super distinct and idiosyncratic experiences.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, like, yeah, he does share them with his brother, but they're ultimately really specific to him. It's
his
not
brother,
something.
It might just be like, oh yeah, we just did that thing in the back.
Yeah, right. He could be like, bro, what? Like,
dude, I was taking shit. What are you talking about?
Right. And I feel like there's a sense of alienation in that.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you can have these experiences and create meaning out of them, but they were not necessarily shared. And I mean there's something very like individualistic and psychoanalytic about that, the fact that like you're sort of alone in this journey of meaning making. It's not something that's shared communally.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not really saying this as a critique or anything necessarily. It's just something I think it's something that I always think of when like I read things like this, not like specifically this genre. It could be any type of iteration, but like I always think, to what extent is this sort of emanating from a place of like alienation and like sort of cultural incoherence.
Yeah, like absolutely, like completely. Like even at this point, like maybe even like this point is like the idea of like the church as a connecting thing might have been something that like was kind of profane. Like the power of it, people
Mm-hmm.
probably felt like the power wasn't there anymore. Like people didn't take it seriously. Like we're working with like post Nietzsche, you know what I'm saying? So
right, it was like it was no longer sacred. It was an institution.
Yeah, without a doubt. And it's like nothing else like was going on around it, like maybe bigger to make you feel connected to people, right? So like that's why what they were doing with like Asafal and like sociology, like the College of Sociology, one of the things was like trying to figure out how to bring like the sacred back into like society.
Mm-hmm.
Or like the idea of the sacred back into the society.
Right.
And it's like working with like a community of individuals, but it's something so special there because it's like once you go ahead and like you like if you searching your past and like say you had like the experience of like the bathroom like church thing, right? And like I had an experience like that or something close, that's gonna bring us together like fucking crazy, or it's gonna make it mean even more. Or even if it's like we go through like the other like ideas of like connection that Bataille talks about with like violence and shit, like it's gonna make that meaning so much more.
Yeah, I think he says that at one point where he talks about like the importance of secrecy or like or conspiracies or sort of like mutual understandings that separate you from everyone else. And I think he talks about that in relation to like the students and the teacher, and how like there's an understanding between the students that you don't rat on each other. I don't know what kind of school he went to because I didn't find that to be the case, but I'm glad he had that kind of experience. that like these shared experiences or shared secrets are sort of like the rudiments of creation of a group or creation of a culture. He doesn't go that far, but that's how I interpret it.
I think absolutely, like it's this shared experience, but it is like that secret experience, and I think that's so important. I'm sure one day we're gonna read like through like Mircea Eliade's like book on like initiations and shit like that, but like that's important. That's really, really important. And then it makes me think of like I remember like I would like go and read the first chapter of Story of the Eye to people from Bataille, and I was reading it to Tyler one day, and I was like, holy shit, like I get this in a different way now, which is something that he talks about, like being it, like you read something and then it's different, you know, like the words speak to you different. It's revelatory, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's fucking sacred. And that's also an aspect that William James speaks of as marking a mystic experience. But what I found there, and it's like sticking on that note of secrecy, was like Simone and the narrator, they're driving through the country and they run over a cyclist and kill her, right? And they know they did it, and that's something extreme that's going to stick with them.
Mm-hmm.
That experience ties those two together,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and like that spiraled them onto like all these other experiences. But it was like, aside from the fact that it was like the aspect of the horrific, but like you can't look away, you know what I mean?
Right.
It like those that two weird aspects of the sacred where it's like it's beautiful but it's like terrifying, you know?
Yeah.
But
This
yeah,
was in a book?
yeah. This was
Oh, okay.
in Story of the Eye. But like because they were tied together by that secret event that happened between them, and that's what like that made that communal draw between them. You know.
Yeah. There's a Black Mirror episode with that exact plot premise.
Really? What is it?
I mean, it begins with this husband and wife, and they're like driving
Oh shit!
through.
They did, didn't they?
Yeah, you
Those
saw it.
motherfuckers.
Yeah,
I think
no, they like fucking ran over. Is profanity allowed in this podcast?
I think yeah.
Oh yeah, you've already stepped over that line a few times.
I transgress over it.
No, yeah, you remember, right? They're driving and they hit the cyclist.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh shit, like we can't report this because then our lives are over. So what did they do? They like dumped the body. But then that sort of starts this whole cycle, or this whole like snowballing effect. More so for the mother, where that secret, which haunts both of them, but she's a little bit better at sort of filing it away under like, you know, the horrific accident. We don't talk about this, but it's haunting the husband or the boyfriend, whoever he was. And I think they like reconvene a little bit later, and then he says something to the effect that, you know, he's gonna report it, and then she freaks out because she's like, no, that's gonna destroy my life. And then so she kills him to keep the secret, and then I think someone else gets involved, and then she has to kill them to like make sure they don't tell, and then eventually this like lawyer or some person comes, and then she has to kill that person. And yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah,
I'm just like, I related to the episode while I was watching it.
Yeah.
Just in the sense of like when you do one bad thing and you're trying to like
keeps going.
Yeah, you're just trying to like reconcile it, or you're trying to like avoid the consequences as much as possible, and then it just turns into a shitstorm.
It kind of reminds me of like hard-boiled novels, like where it's like somebody would just like to me it's like the In Too Deep like style of it, where like they'll do like one thing to fix something and then it just keeps
Right.
up. They have to just keep going with this, like, dude, just stop, you get in so much trouble. Like, holy shit.
I think I think the way they like find out at the end that it's the evidence that they're able to use in court to like persecute her is it was something like, since you know it's Black Mirror, so it's like cyberpunk futurism or something, and that there's like a camera installed into like their pet guinea pigs or the babies or some shit.
That's funny.
Yeah, it was
wow.
some weird shit.
You think babies have cameras in them now?
Yeah.
I think that's why like they're so smart and like weird smart asses and do like crazy stuff, because it's like they're like a little bit too advanced, and then like their GPT 3 like
GP3 what? I feel like an old man. I have no idea what that is.
It's their AI writing system.
Okay.
It's starting to like learn from everything that it's been using and picking up. So like they're getting too advanced, and then they say some weird smart ass stuff, and like you look at them like, haha, that was cute, and then you're like,
that reminds me of okay, first off, yeah, babies nowadays and kids, they scare me.
Okay.
Because like they'll be in their stroller like on iPads, and so that doesn't make me scared of them, but I'm scared for them, because like I feel like our generation was the last, we were sort of at the middle of like, we experienced pre like internet social media hegemony, like that world,
okay,
and then post, right before that those technologies sort of proliferated and became like integral to everyday life. And so I feel like at least for me, I was the effect of those technologies was very apparent, you know, like what my life was like before then, and how my mind worked, and like how I was able to focus, and just how people interacted with each other before and then after. But people who grew up with that, um, they don't have like a lived memory of time before. And I'm
Yeah.
sure people older than me, they'll be like, kid, like you don't even know what you're talking about. Like, no, but I know like how, dude, like these phones and iPads, they're like dopamine feedback loops, and these kids are basically growing up on them, right? Like they're little babies and they're like using iPads.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, it's one of those things that I'm just like, we can talk about, you know, consequences to this that are like really apparent that maybe they can do in like clinical studies, but I feel like there's some like really profound consequence to this that is not apparent to us, and it won't become apparent to us until very later into the future, and it's going to be very yeah.
What do you think is going to be a consequence of it? You think maybe like something with communication?
I have no clue. It's an unknown.
I mean, just working in a grocery store at times, I notice manners have dropped.
Mm-hmm.
And that also, like, that increased when everyone started wearing masks. Like, I guess people
Manners dropping?
Yeah, like extreme. It was interesting. It's like manners dropped completely because I guess it's like maybe people felt this like you can't probably not consciously, but it's like okay, like you can't see their face,
Mm-hmm.
so
sure.
like they can act anyway, and
Right.
there's no consequence because it can't be identified. It's not them. They're wearing a mask,
Right.
So I saw manners drop.
Yeah, people think they can play around.
Yeah. It was funny, and then like the people where it's like they would like come up to me like thank you for what you're doing, and then I'd feel like a hero.
Yeah.
It was nice.
Yeah,
And then all that stopped. Like 2 months in.
I'm interested in like what the long-term consequences will be of a like post-pandemic world. It's just sort of like the social and political policies, that we've instituted in order to, be able to manage, and in order for states to be able to like manage their populations and keep things nominally stable. I think I don't really agree with I think some people have kind of come out and said like this is intentional, for like people who want to sort of change or puppeteer society in a certain direction. I'm not sure I agree with that, but I do think that there are unforeseen consequences, because how could there not be of something like at this scale?
I mean, wouldn't it be like kind of unforeseen consequences to everything? Like that's, I mean, immediately the image that comes to my mind is like going back to Leiris's reading, like they set up for a race and you don't know what the consequence is. Like obviously it's two different things, but like if you do something, something's gonna come from it.
Right.
Yeah. So Fran, what is a sacred moment for you? What is a memory that immediately stands out in your childhood?
Probably my trips to Japan.
Okay.
I would say possess the most emotional weight. I'd say especially along the lines of like childhood wonder, I would say my trips would definitely be under that category. I think for a lot of people, like memories of travel would fall under that category.
Absolutely. I used to travel to Tennessee all the time when I was little.
Yeah.
We traveled all over the places, but like I remember Tennessee specifically with my grandparents because we would go for like funerals a lot. Yeah, so that's like my strongest memories of that. But speaking of Japan, that's interesting because like Japan was very special for me too, and I think about all like especially like I think me and you talked about this like after you come back like you have like weird like complete flashes of like being there and like these like emotional overwhelmings of like the feeling of being in Japan. And I remember thinking that trip was going to turn me into like a great photographer. and it turned me into the photographer that I am today and what I wanted, but not in the way that I thought it was. Like I thought that I was going to go get all this cool shit, shoot all these cool things, do all this cool street stuff. It it changed it. Big deal. It was like, yo, like you don't know your equipment. Street photography is not for you. It was actually there was an unforeseen.
Yeah.
ending. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it gave you what you needed rather than what you wanted.
Yeah, by
It
giving
was
me the
interesting
results
because
that I
every
didn't
fear
like
that
at
I
first,
had,
and
like,
those results was like
hey,
how it would be like in
that's
America,
your,
like around
only
like
point
things
to
with like
change.
public
Right.
transportation, which comes from the fact that when I was younger, we weren't really allowed to do anything. We were very contained in the house and like and close to like family. Like we weren't even allowed to like go out on our own on Halloween, right? So like going to Japan and like just doing everything by myself, but not having a single bit of fear about doing it was fucking weird, you know? I remember I paid for the wrong amount for a train
Mm-hmm.
and somehow knew exactly how to communicate to the person at the thing that I paid the wrong amount and I needed to change it.
Yeah.
And it worked. And it's like, and then I look, it's like, oh, I guess like it was confident, but I think it's because like, Leiris speaks about like something being out of the ordinary. It's different. It's a contrast from your everyday life, right? And it having this weird like sacred quality, like this it's this weird revelatory thing where it's like this strange freedom because it's out of the contained of what you know. And I think that really had something to do with it, even going to fucking Tennessee. And like I remember one time we went to Tennessee, one of the last times we went, it was a full family trip, and we were walking around a church, and the churches there have cemeteries like connected to them. And I remember looking, I was like, oh, this says Jenkins, and I was like, oh, that's funny, like, yo, this is family. And then another one, Jenkins, and I was like, excuse me. They were like, oh, this is a family cemetery. And like it's and that didn't bother me, and maybe it has something to do with like cemeteries or like funeral stuff, or the feeling that I have around them now doesn't bother me too much because when I was younger, I went to so many,
Mm-hmm.
like, and when I went to them, it was like they were out of my normal home area. We traveled, we went far, and
Mm-hmm.
it was different places. It's like Tennessee in the fucking 90s is different, like I remember like this gigantic anthill, right? Like this thing was, say about as tall as half my leg, maybe I'm like 5'5", and I remember seeing it, and I was with my grandfather, and I stepped on it, and all the ants came crawling out on me, and I remember
They're like, yo, fuck this guy up.
yeah, dude, and they were weird looking. Some of them looked like
Yeah.
spiders, and I was freaking out.
Right.
And like I remember, like I was like rubbing my leg on my grandfather's to get the bugs off of myself onto him, and he was just calm and laughing.
That's funny.
Yeah, but those trips are special, and then I guess that connects to that time where me and you were we're sitting outside of that like Plant-Wise place eating food and stuff, and then we were giving those ants
Oh my
caffeine
God,
and
yeah.
ruining their colony. So that was a payback.
I wonder how they're doing right now.
They've probably accelerated to their logical conclusion.
Yeah, I think we manhandled their entire population and set them on a completely different trajectory.
Most
They
likely.
might be entering the Gilded Age at this point. But going back to what you were saying, I think experiences of death when you are young
Mm-hmm.
are extremely profound and also necessary. Like
Yeah.
I think it's really it's good that like you were included, within all of these trips,
Mm-hmm.
whether it was for like someone who had just passed away or showing reverence or respect for people that had passed away before your time or that you didn't know. I feel like death is one of those things that it's like people, there's sort of a weird tenuous relationship between children and death.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent do we expose them to that process? It's kind of like it's like one of those things like, oh, like where do babies come from?
Yeah.
It's like it's like precarious
Where do adults
territory. It's like you
go?
don't know. Yeah, like you don't know like whether to like distort it, omit it completely. Both of which I think are the wrong orientation. But it was making me think of my own experience. I think the second time I went to Japan,
Mm-hmm.
It was because my grandfather had passed away,
Okay.
and we were at his funeral, and it had a really profound impact on me. I think in the main, or on the first level, simply because I think foreign travel have these features of mysticism to them when
Yeah.
you're a child, because you are sort of you're having this encounter with something that is foreign and that you don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also like a level of naivety to it too. It's like you're able to sort of create a story about like this world that probably isn't really in touch with the way it actually is. Like I know, like for me, like the sort of feelings of wonder I still have about Japan, they're very incongruent with like my dad,
Okay.
and like how sort of he describes Japan. Sometimes I'll be saying something to him and he's like, "What are you talking about? Like it's not like that at all."
Yeah,
and I'm like, yeah, and then I get mad and I'm like, "Yes, it is." um no, but I mean, I think cultural practices around death especially are so idiosyncratic, and Japanese culture is so unique or idiosyncratic, or at least different from the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And so that had a really powerful effect on me, because it was just not something that was familiar to me, the way that they were practicing mourning death, all the way like in every feature, like how they structured it, sort of like the entire artifice, like the physical objects that were there, sort of the religious ceremonies that they engaged in. It felt very different than when I was at funerals or wakes in the United States. But I don't know what to attribute that to. That could just be because, when it's easier to like sort of exoticize and mysticize a foreign culture,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But that's just to reiterate. I do think like these early experiences of death, I think fall under the category of the original question that you asked, like what memories do I have of the sacred? I feel like early encounters with death probably were the most profound.
Yeah. Without a doubt. The mourning culture there, is it like around sadness and like crying things out?
It's hard for me to say. Like, I don't want to give an answer that doesn't have integrity to like
Okay. Yeah.
what the
Yeah.
actual reality is. Like, I can only speak anecdotally in what I observed,
Uh
in
huh.
my like ignorant ass like 10-year-old self. Um, I mean that they are. There is like an animist element. I mean, it's like a synthesis of animism and Buddhism.
Okay.
Um, the one I was at was more so Buddhist. In terms of like emotional display, uh, I don't know. It's hard for me to draw a comparison between the two.
Mm-hmm. I get that.
Yeah,
I get that.
but Japanese people are always very kind of repressed, so it wouldn't surprise me if they were a little more reserved.
Yeah. That makes sense. Um, do you think words are magic?
Words are magic.
Yeah.
I think.
Do you think? Okay, I guess going back, cause like, I remember when I first read this Leiris thing, I was doing like, I was like combining kind of work that like didn't have anything to do with each other, but had everything to do with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And making this crazy like Frankenpaper, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there's like over 70 fucking footnotes. um, and like I said earlier, like when I read this and connected it with William James,
Mm-hmm.
and the aspect of like the mystical experience, which is why like when I think of the sacred, I think of is like the mystical experience of the sacred, and then it's like when I think of the sacred, I'm like, it's like I've been trying to like reframe myself, like because like, oh, what if someone's like, oh, what's the sacred, And it's like, I don't think the question is like what is the sacred, but like what is sacred, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like to you, you know? Like yeah, I think that's about it. It's like not what is the sacred, but like what is sacred. So it's like what is sacred to you, and this can be revealed in anything, especially if we're tying it with the idea of a mystic experience of what is sacred, you know. So in this, Leiris speaks about words and how words can, something that you've read a dozen times, one day it opens up and speaks to you completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in that moment that it's like it sends you on this string of associations, string of understandings, an inspirational string. You know, it's like it sends you on this line to explain. It's very strange. Like he speaks of like this girl named Rebecca that he knew from school, right? And then he's going more with like word association, which is really a surrealist thing. He's like, okay, so Rebecca, and then he's like the Eka of it. It reminds him of Mecca, and then like that reminds him of impeccable, you know, and then like the R sound, and like he's going with that aspect of it. But then I think of like William James, and it's like, you know, you like, for example, like I said with reading Story of the Eye, like to people, and then like that one time I read it and it was like, oh, I get it, you know, like maybe somebody else doesn't get it in that way, but like that spoke to me with his theory, you know, and maybe it's just has to do with like some type of strange association thing, but it's like they open up. Like he mentions in this reading, Leiris, that like sometimes words will act as a key, and it opens up this strange door or a box, and it explains to you like an aspect of life or something to you that it didn't before. Maybe you weren't ready. Maybe you like this is the exact moment. It's interesting, you know. Like I feel this happens. This happens a lot, especially like when we play with words as more than just the base of language.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. I think we had this conversation once,
Yeah.
actually, about because you were talking to me, I think, about magic and spells
Mm.
and like the occult,
Mm-hmm.
and I do think there's something to this idea that words or language are a form of spells that are cast through the tongue. Not that like I pretend to know anything about like magic or the occult,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think there's something to the idea that if there is such a thing as magic, it comes by way of language, right? Because you're able to, you know, utter something, a certain type of idea or a certain type of story that is able to come into someone and like disseminate itself
Yeah,
and
yeah.
have such a profound impact on them as to profoundly change them
Mm-hmm.
in that moment or for the rest of their life, you know? And it's able to unite an entire people or divide an entire people all through, you know, something that you're uttering through the tongue. And I think it's interesting because I've heard this idea before, sort of in different iterations or different ways that people, you know, ideology is a form of magic, and that we're laboring under certain spells that were cast in, you know, generations before us,
Okay.
that we are like reproducing, right? And so, I mean, even in that book Ishmael, you know, which like
Mm-hmm.
I've spoken to you a few times about, I mean, I think the main premise of the text is that, you know, there was a certain cultural story that was born out of the crucible of the agricultural revolution, and it gives us the sort of story about like what it means to be human, what human history is, what it means to progress, what a civilization is, what the human condition is, that, you know, we've clung to in all of our human artifices and institutions and everything that we've created. And if that's not spellcasting, like I don't know what is. Right? Because that, I mean, those are what else is more powerful than that? You know, like I don't think it's sort of material wealth or yeah, I don't think it's materialism or wealth or resources that drive the world necessarily. They're the engine. I think it's a sort of memes or agents of culture or ideas that really unite people and drive social change.
Absolutely.
That was a long-winded way of saying something
Words have
completely
power.
incoherent. Yeah.
No, I don't think it's. I don't think it's incoherent at all. I mean, you know, like, I think immediately towards like, okay, like if we're looking at like a biblical point, like the world was created with the word. You know what I mean? Like, let there be light, and there was light. You know, so it's interesting to think about this. Like, and it also makes me think, like, right now I started reading this book that's like tying Simone Weil and Bataille together, right? And like what the author is saying is that those two used writing to create themselves and to like make themselves into like these strange like saints of the sacred, you know, but they use their writing to do it, and then like putting that into people. It's like, and they also use like their lives and like the little spark of their lives, like little fragments of their lives, like as the blood to give life to the writing. That was like, the writing was a fiction, but in the sense of a fiction kind of became like the reality-ish of things, kind of real Mishima-ish, you know?
Yeah.
And then like, I mean, Mishima wrote like a foreword for a Bataille book, so it makes sense.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think the idea of memes, not memes in sort of like the silly internet kind of way, even though, I mean, that is kind of an iteration of it, but like memes as agents of culture, ideology, like languages as spells, I think, yeah, that would be sort of a good place to flesh out a little more next time.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe we...
Oh my god. It's okay, I can't. So maybe we... ボンバーへもんかせクソな MC そのマイクフォンかせ磁力記録言葉の威力ひどく練られた蹴られたリリックが魅力のラバカリア頭きたいやからにはまあ正した瞬間すると山田マンと級のコンビネーション